Hello everyone, it's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Alright, this looks better. We're using a SIM card in various locations. We plan for everything. We plan for, in case there was a power outage, we have our own little device in order to power banks we can plug our laptops into. And in this particular case, it was, what if you jump into a place that doesn't have Wi-Fi or has slow Wi-Fi? And we jumped into a place that has no to slow Wi-Fi. So this little device made in China allows you to take a SIM card pretty much anywhere you go. It's like a mobile Wi-Fi. We've used it exclusively on this trip, and I've been able to live stream. So good on you. What is this? Huawei. Shout out Huawei, man. All right, so I hope everyone is doing okay this morning. Before I start, let me check this. While I'm checking this, if you guys enjoy what I'm putting down and you find yourself here often, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and you can always support the work through Patreon. I am planning on having a patron appreciation show tonight. I tend to have it at 5 p.m. That's brutal here, but nevertheless, I still think I'm going to keep it at that for tonight. I got to be honest, I don't necessarily know the topic for tonight, so if you guys are any of my patrons that want to shoot me one, let me know, and I'll look over some of the information that people sent. I know Amala sent me stuff all the time. I know Rob sent me stuff. So that's still going to be tonight at 5 p.m. Eastern. Right now, though, I want to talk about something that's a little bit more worrying. I don't talk too much about the Brett Kavanaugh thing. I've done a few videos on it, but I don't overly talk about it because I find I heard her testimony. Her testimony comes across as credible to me, but like I've said before, I don't want Brett Kavanaugh confirmed. I don't know what took place 40 years ago. None of them know what took place 40 years ago. A sham investigation by the FBI is not going to dig up or figure out what took place 40 years ago. Everybody in this case is being political or are being political bias actors. You have one side that says we don't want to confirm. The other side says we want to confirm, and all of them lean towards whatever they want. I'm just honest enough to say it. This guy's going to be on the bench for 40-something years after Republicans have cheated profusely in order to get their last few people on. So no, I don't want him on the bench. So I am magnificently biased on this front. So I don't cover this story. I don't want him on the bench. That said, there are more worrying things that are taking place, or just as worrying. I could say it that way, depending on to what degree you believe the Kavanaugh thing is worrying or disconcerting. I think it's very disconcerting. But there's things of greater scope. So while all of this chaos in theater and circus was taking place with the Kavanaugh hearings, simultaneously, Kay Billy Hutcherson, an ambassador, a permanent representative to NATO, that's supposedly an ambassador of the United States, has threatened to attack Russia. Literally. So, Russia is coming out with a new line of missile. Now, part of the reason they developed this new line of missile is because the United States has been expanding NATO, and they've been expanding it to the borders of Russia. I'm going to go further into that. But ultimately, this new hypersonic missile of sorts is not supposed to be able to be shot down. The United States has said this is a violation. Now, the United States itself has come out with this, and I suppose it's relying on its client NATO states, which for whatever reason they're pretending as if this is some kind of cooperation, saying this somehow breaks a treaty. And it's saying it somehow breaks a treaty is making the point that they could strike Russia. That is their purview of sorts to attack Russia. Now, you can imagine what Russia's response to this is going to be. It's going to be hyperbolic because you've just said you could strike and attack us. This is with all of the other hysteria that's taken place, screaming about spies being taken down. Why? Just because Vladimir Putin wanted to do it. This is one of the things that the Telegraph made the point of. Just Vladimir Putin just wanted to do it. He's a bad guy. And being a bad guy, he just wanted to take these guys out. So he just poisoned a spy that he could have gotten his hands on at various points along last X number of years he was in prison. In the United States, a hysteria going on talking about Russian hacking. And the hysteria going from Russian hacking to Russia is continually attacking our elections. Russia is pushing forward climate change stuff, or climate change now, or environmentalism. Russia has been responsible for Black Lives Matter. They've used Russia for all sorts of stuff. And now you have supposedly an ambassador to the National Alliance Treaty Organization, an organization that is set up to supposedly be against Soviet Union, an institution that no longer exists, saying that they're willing to strike Russia for what the United States has said, had claims, is somehow a violation of some kind of treaty. Let's do this story first. And then I want to talk about it after because there's a larger context here. The United States Permanent Representative to NATO, Kay Bailey Hutchison, Ambassador Kay Bailey Hutchison, warned Tuesday that the United States could take out Russian missiles that are perceived to be in violation of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty should Moscow continue to violate the agreement. We have been trying to send a message to Russia for several years that we know they are violating the treaty. We have shown Russia evidence that they are violating the treaty, Hutchison said, according to the NATO mission's transcript of the press conference on sidelines of the NATO defense ministerial meetings in Brussels. They are building medium-range ballistic missiles in violations of the INF. That is a fact we have proven, she said, just like weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Asked what type of countermeasures the United States and NATO would pursue in the face of Russia violation, Hutchison said the countermeasures we would take out the missiles that are in development by Russia in violation of the treaty. That's called a nuclear war. Does she know that? Does the person who's saying that know that? The countermeasures we would take out the missiles that are in development by Russia in violation of the treaty. Getting them to withdraw would be our choice, of course. But I think the question is, what would you do if this continues to a point where we know that they're capable of delivering? And at what point would we then be looking for a capability to take out the missiles that could hit any of our countries in Europe and hit America and Alaska, she added. Later, on Tuesday, she backed out. She backed away from this, saying she was not talking about preemptively striking Russia when she said that they would take out the missiles. Then what does take out the missiles mean? What does take out the missiles mean? I don't understand what that means then. Now, you can understand that Russia flipped out about this. It seems as if people who are making such statements, prior to Hutchison's tweet, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova responded forcefully, saying Hutchison behaved aggressively and destructively by making such comments. No, you mean she was a lunatic. Who authorized this lady to make such statements? The American people? Do the ordinary people in America know what such diplomats know, what the so-called diplomats who are getting paid with the money from the ordinary pockets behave themselves so aggressively and destructively? No, they don't. No, they don't know that. They're looking at a circus right now with the Supreme Court pick. They don't know that this woman, this lunatic, who calls herself a diplomat and who's given this title of ambassador for our country with our tax dollars, is out there threatening to attack a nuclear-powered nation. Preemptively. I don't care that you backed on that. The original statement for that was, we can attack Russia. We will take out their missiles. If it's not preemptively, I don't know what you're talking about. Just to add a little bit of context to this, the United States, just in recent memory, they're using this idea of a treaty. We've pulled out of the Paris Treaty. We've pulled out of the treaty with Iran. And we've even pulled out this idea of weapons in space with Donald Trump saying he's going to create a space force. Donald Trump didn't care one iota about any of those treaties, and the United States is doing what the United States does. Beyond just the treaties that we've pulled out of, that we've completely just ignored, there's something else. Oh, and by the way, unsigned treaties. Unsigned. The thing that I showed yesterday, showing with the United States in an action in the ICC, the International Criminal Court, where, yeah, this is amazing. This is amazing. The idea that you're going to pull this shit about Russia, a person sitting on the moon listening to this, saying that the United States is making a stink about what it's considering to be Russian aggression or Russian creating missiles that are violating treaties. We've pulled out of multiple treaties just in the short term. John Bolton is out there attacking the International Criminal Court We signed that treaty and then unsigned that treaty when we didn't like the idea that we could be held liable for the things that we were doing. And he is right now attacking the International Criminal Court because they want to investigate war crimes that we have potentially created, that we've done, or that Israel has potentially done. Let's be honest, not potentially done. Fucking amazing that they say this stuff with a straight face. Let's go further. Right now, back during the Bush era, when the Soviet Union went belly up, not 1 inch eastward, that was the rule. We weren't supposed to extend NATO not 1 inch eastward. Now, you can understand that what's the point of NATO at the point where there's not a world with the Soviet Union, and Gorbachev, believing that he was dealing with a fair and honest partner, did exactly what he said he was going to do. Soviet Union was dissolved. They pulled and allowed for the reunification of Berlin, of Germany. And what did we do? We continued to expand NATO. If you ever watch conversations with Gorbachev, I think there was a conversation with Gorbachev a few years ago. This man who has such optimism and enthusiasm is a grizzled old man now that's a bit bitter at what he considered, for the most part, has been taken advantage of by the United States. I would watch his interviews. His interviews are fascinating to see the difference in temperament between who that person was versus who that person is now, knowing what he knows now about what was going to take place with the arbitrations. It's an amazing change. Let's take a look at this. It's common cause. All the Western powers promised Gorbachev and Sheridan's that NATO would not expand eastward by 1 inch if Moscow pulled out the Red Army from East Germany and allowed the peaceful reunification of West Germany. This was a titanic concession by Gorbachev. It led to a failed coup against him in 1991 by the communist hardliners. Now, this gets worse for Russia in this case, because Bill Clinton essentially assisted in, you can call it somewhat of a soft coup. I guess coup is the wrong word for it, but it allowed Yeltsin to stay in power. Yeltsin was the choice of the United States. Yeltsin believed that the communists was going to be able to win that election because Yeltsin was such a drunkard and unpopular. We instigated ourselves entirely into their electoral process in order to make sure Yeltsin gets elected. Putin was our guy. Who knew? Putin was our guy at one point. Once he started looking out for the interests of Russians, no, not so much. Not so much. The document released by George Washington University in Washington, D.C., which I attended for a semester, makes sickening reading. All Western powers and statesmen assured the Russians that NATO would not take advantage of the Soviet retreat, and the new era of amity and cooperation would dawn in post-Cold War Europe. The United States Secretary of State Jim Baker offered ironclad guarantees there would be no NATO expansion. Lies. All lies. Gorbachev was a humanist, a very decent, intelligent man who believed he could end the Cold War nuclear arms race. He ordered the Red Army back from Eastern Europe. I was in Wunsdorf, East Germany headquarters of the group of Soviet forces, Germany, and Stasi secret police HQ in East Berlin right after the pullout order was given. The Soviets withdrew their 338,000 troops and 4,200 tanks and sent them home at lightning speed. Western promises made the Soviet leaders by George W. Bush and Jim Baker quickly proved to be empty. They were honorable men, but their successors were not. Bill Clinton and George W. Bush quickly began moving NATO into Eastern Europe, violating all the pledges to Moscow. Think about that. Gorbachev was willing to end the Cold War. The United States looked at him as being weak and looked at him as somebody that they can take advantage of because he was willing to end the Cold War. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Let's keep going. At the time, I wrote the best solution would be for the demilitarization of the former Soviet-controlled Eastern Europe. NATO had no need or business to expand eastward. Doing so would be a constant provocation of Russia, which regarded Eastern Europe as essentially defensive places against invasion from the West. Now, with NATO forces on the western border, Russia's deepest fears have been realized. Today, the United States military aircraft based coast of Romania and Bulgaria, former Warsaw Pact members probe Russian airspace over the Black Sea and the vital strategic port of Sevastopol. Washington talks about arming chaotic the Ukraine. And by the way, we have armed the Ukraine. There have been Nazi marches in the Ukraine because we believe that Nazis will be a bulwark against the Soviet invasion or Soviets or the Russians in that area. There is no Soviets. My point is, the United States has taken this posture that arming Nazis is somehow a bulwark in the same way that Israel took the posture that arming terrorists would be a bulwark towards maintaining the Golan Heights. It is an amazing thing to do, but this is what is taking place. This idea that the United States is crying foul that Russia may or may not be somehow violating some kind of treaty is laughable. It's laughable. Utterly and completely laughable. Whether or not they're violating the treaty, I have no idea. But the idea that the United States is crying foul about it is nonsense. It's utter and complete nonsense. A man sitting on the goddamn moon laughs at this. The map that shows how many NATO troops are deployed along the Russian borders. And this includes an increase in the troops that are being deployed on the Russian border, including the potential of a Ukraine joining NATO or joining the European Union, which would be an amazing provocation. An amazing provocation. Not now. And this, again, is part of the reason why Ukraine fell apart in the first place. Take a look at this. I thought I opened this. Here we are. NATO expansion has surrounded Russia. What would your country do? What would your country do? Now, this is not, this kind of conceptual quiz. We know what the United States would do. When missiles were being shipped to Cuba, something that's on the United States border, the United States was willing to go to nuclear war and willing to literally bring the country or bring the world to a nuclear war. And just to make this point clear, Kennedy, there's a phone call, you can listen to it, where Kennedy is having a conversation, I believe, with Eisenhower, asking him whether or not Khrushchev would be willing to launch, because Kennedy understood the scenario that he was encountering. Eisenhower was wrong. Eisenhower told Kennedy, no. The correct answer is, Khrushchev has said in his books that he had already given the order to fire those missiles, meaning if Kennedy would have attacked, those missiles would have launched. It would have been automatic. It wouldn't have mattered what Khrushchev wanted at that point. It would have been automatic. Yes, there's a cabinet hearing. By the same token, these guys are talking about a nuclear war. These guys are talking about a nuclear war. So, have the larger context. Whether or not Russia's violating it, I don't know. I'm not going to take the United States' word for it as a sole and only person or arbiter in this, nor am I going to take purely NATO input in this, seeing as many of these places are just client states of the United States. What I will do is say, I can look at all of this and say that they have been magnificent provocations from the standpoint of the West into their territory. They will be insane. Any country will be insane not to be able to maintain the security of their state, especially when you've had a country that's been invaded by Western powers numerous occasions. Russians have lost millions of people from Western provocations into their space. You can understand them being loyal. Bernie or guillotine 2020. Can we just start hitting people that talk about Russia interference in the knees by continuously repeating the Obama line? The 80s call, they want their foreign policy back. That's actually funny. That's actually pretty funny. That's pretty damn funny. All right. With the map of Europe, don't we need a Kiev instead of a key? A Kiev instead of a key. Yes, we do need a Kiev. We do need a Kiev. Kiev in Ukraine. All right, I'm going to end this. I have other videos I want to do, and I didn't want this one to go too long. Explosive news. I can't tell if bombshell is too on the nose or if not enough for the explosive news that the United States war economy is booming. You have to say the word booming. Military relations. I did not have military relations with that nation. No, you did have military relations with that nation. You've had military relations with a lot of nations. If you look up NATO's map, NATO would tell you how many countries they bombed, shot, killed. They would call it security keeping, or they would call it keeping the peace. They would call it all sorts of names. I just asked the basic question. Why is NATO still in existence? The Soviet Union went bust a long time ago. And they were promised not an inch east. They moved a lot of inch east. I've started watching a little Ron Paul's Liberty Report. Interesting to hear some of the same foreign policy points being raised. I know! Like, I did a video, I did an article, I wrote a piece, this was a while back, saying that Ron Paul was going to be the new creation of the Republican Party. And I said that to say, from a foreign policy standpoint, it articulates what the public wants. I don't agree with them from the standpoint of domestic policy, but when you get into this idea of, hey, maybe we shouldn't be killing and bombing abroad, and maybe the money that we use to kill and bomb abroad we can use internally, and this idea of keeping an empire is problematic. And it hadn't worked for Romans, nor did it work for the Brits. Yeah, that talking point, that line of logic, is a perfectly complete, consistent line of logic. It makes all the sense in the world. When Ron Paul says it, I nod, says, yes, that makes all the sense in the world. Why are we bombing and killing, and why are we spending our money to do this? We're creating our terrorists. We're creating our monsters. We're creating our monsters. Odd warp. NATO is another way of funding taxpayer money to private hands and war profiteering. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. That's absolutely true, Odd warp. That's absolutely true. Like, part of the reason that these guys are bombing and killing in the first place, I would not be surprised one iota if it's to keep the war economy booming, just like you said, Balthazar. Like a broken clock, Ron Paul is always right twice a day, but never on domestic policy. Yes, be green, agreed. His domestic policy is absolutely bizarre. But foreign policy, yes, Ron Paul and I are on the same page from a foreign policy standpoint. We're creating our monsters. We're creating our monsters. Now, if you're in a weapons company, you may like that foreign policy. You may love the fact that you're creating your monsters because, hey, there are more and more monsters for you to need a bomb for, or a bullet for, or a gun for. If you don't want your money wasted and you realize you're already $20-something trillion in debt, then not so much. It's the only manufacturing and production we have left. Tim Flobuck, I get that, but Jesus Christ. What do you mean it didn't work for the Romans and the Brits? It worked like a fucking charm. Have you seen the British Empire? Have you seen the British Empire? No, you haven't, because it doesn't exist anymore. What about the Roman Empire? Doesn't exist anymore. None of those places exist anymore. All of those places fell apart with the contradictions associated with having an empire. All of them. World War III would happen if the American people don't stand up and take back our government. Dr. Winston Ubugi. I agree with you. I just don't know how the... If Donald Trump being elected is not enough to break people out of complacency, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. All things pass. So my argument here is that those things passed because of the internal contradictions in having those empires. They fell apart. That's my argument. That's my argument. That argument, I would argue, is true. It wasn't a situation where they had to pass. They passed because of the factors that were associated with their internal workings. It's not a constant that those things pass. That's my point. Instead of protesting over Kavanaugh, we should be in the streets protesting endless wars. There's going to be a women's march on D.C. that will protest the war. And the funny part is, they made a very strong point of saying we will not be co-opted by the Democratic Party. Loved it. Loved it. Abby Martin is one of the heads of that, so that's going to be awesome. All right, I'm going to end this. I will be back. I have multiple shows that I'm going to do for today, so I will see you guys in a very few. And Bernie or Guillotine, and I'm assuming this is Balthazar on Streamlabs. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. I'll see you guys in a very few. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and you can always support through Patreon. Thanks all.